Where do you think that you entered into contemporary commentary? Like, from what perspective do you think you began interpreting?
I mean, it depends on what you mean. I mean, there are levels to commentary. So, I mean, 13 years ago, I was a snotty little student writing angry left-wing Guardian comments. So I guess that's an entry of sorts.
Okay.
And then later into adulthood, I shifted rightwards, more in the blogging era, writing snotty little blog posts from a right-wing perspective. And then acquired readers when I managed to get a position writing semi-regularly through Quillette from a kind of, I'd say, like a broadly right-wing perspective. And managed to branch out, had the good luck to branch out into other outlets from there.
Yeah. The right wing, I'm kind of going on this exploration of the different currents in it. It seems very interesting. A lot of weird stuff, a lot of stodgy stuff. There's just a whole bunch of stuff going on over there. And I think it's kind of avant-garde because it's was kind of thrust out of the Overton window, kind of regulated it to like this kind of fertile in-group dynamic and stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on in there. It seems to me, coming from kind of a centrist, left-right centrist kind of position, and then venturing outward from anti-woke into different, more positive movements. Got tired of the anti-woke thing a couple years ago. Where did you, at what point did you feel it okay to think of yourself as right-wing? Was there some resistance?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, anytime you break out of your previous model of thought, there's going to be your own resistance against yourself. Whether you're a left-winger going rightwards or a right-winger going leftwards, nobody likes to have to see the world again and build up new models. And of course, you know, when I was younger, it was still, even though that was kind of the Trump era, the Brexit era, there was still a lot of fashionable political correctness around young people such as then myself. So there was a certain amount of kind of mental aversion to breaching taboos as well, and encouraging negative feedback. But for one reason or another, I kept driving forward on that. And of course, you end up finding that there are people who do agree with you, so that gives you more positive reinforcement for better or worse. So I guess that encouraged me to keep pursuing those lines of thought and creativity.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned models. What do you think, looking backward, were the left-wing or leftish models that you were operating under, like the principles of that worldview?
So I'd guess a kind of general assumption of equality, not just kind of inherent equality, but kind of a cultural equality between different peoples, who are then kind of forced apart or problematized by the kind of oppressive mainstream culture. And then when you drift rightwards, you tend to see different cultures, different peoples as, in some, of course, not always, but in some ways, different in a more essential sense that isn't just imposed by the powers that be. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's one adoption of a more right-wing model. Although, again, of course, it's a question of scale. Words like essential, we don't want to give them too fixed meaning because it can be 50%, it can be 100%. But that's one general model of rightwards drifting, I think. And then also, I think there's a more of like psychological models. Obviously, it's something of a stereotype, but when you're younger, you have this kind of sense of wanting to protest against things and kick up against the parents and the teachers who are trying to put you down. And sometimes as you get older, you start looking at your life, getting a bit of more of a sense of perspective on what you've been doing with it and thinking, you know, maybe the parents and the teachers weren't so terrible all along. And you can rethink your kind of adolescent pretentiousness, at least in some cases. So I guess those are two examples, one kind of ideological and one more psychological of models I, at least, was operating under.
Mm-hmm. One, I don't know if it's a problem or not, but one of the dangers or the one reason to be wary of the right wing is the capacity of it to get too rigid and too essentialist and to start to impose rigider and rigider forms of order. And that can be reactionary to, let's just say, the complete dissolution of any sort of hierarchy or any sort of order that we see at play in certain bowers of the culture and stuff. So that's the interesting kind of balancing act of kind of readopting or adopting for the first time hierarchy and some notion of evaluation and judgment that renders things unequal. And it takes kind of a mature, if you don't want to be a fascist, you have to do something else. So how do you approach the fascistic or the overly rigid fundamentalist currents or capabilities of what we call the right?
Yeah, I mean, that's why the point about scale is so important. If you say human beings are unequal, that can mean everything from, we like one cuisine, you like one cuisine, to some kind of Hitlerian racial hierarchy based on, loathing and bigotry. So it's very important to have a sense, not just of talking in terms of very definite, fixed ideas about the world, but to talk about in terms of, gradients and different scales. Mm-hmm. How different, what kind of difference are we talking about here? Mm-hmm. Or if we're saying that things, are normatively good or normatively bad, well, how good, how bad, and not just thinking in a very kind of monomaniacal way. I guess approaching the kind of fascist question, I mean, one of them, the ways to resist it is just to have a sense of humor and a sense of curiosity. I think generally the fascistic mode of thinking is to be extremely dogmatic about everything. Mm-hmm. In politics and in art, just having these incredibly grand, intoxicating ideas about how the world is. So having a sense of humor, a sense of kind of broader apolitical curiosity is a good way just of resisting any slide towards that kind of mental pit, mm-hmm. because you're just too broad for it as a person, as a thinker. Mm-hmm. And it's to emphasize that people can be equal and unequal. We have our differences, but we also have our similarities. And even if we might be different about one thing, we can still find common cause and cooperation on another thing, rather than seeing ourselves as diametrically opposed, mm-hmm. with those differences.
And one can't overlook the examples, especially of the last century, of the so-called left wing going in a very rigid direction as well. It's that rigidity, incuriosity, and ill humor or lack of humor is not specifically a right-wing thing. For whatever reason, we in the West are, there's more of a stigma toward the fascistic, and at least in the left, it's a little bit more acceptable to have a communist hammer and sickle in your profile than it is to have a swastika. It's not balanced, even though they both have exerted pretty extreme measures to implement their ideology.
I mean, there's a sense that the right wing has inherently bad intentions, and then the communists have these good intentions which somehow channeled into negative directions, mm-hmm. Which only really works if you consider the good intentions in just the most woolly, kind of sentimental way, and you don't drill down, mm-hmm. on the ideology and the implications that it has for whole classes of people who are considered in the way of progress.
Well, not just classes of people, but ways of being. Ways of engaging with the world are severely limited in any extreme ideology. If what happened in the USSR is any measure of communism taken to a certain extreme.
Yeah,
there's a meme. Well, there's two memes. One is that the left can't meme, which is kind of a jab at a certain type of political humor or expression that the right is better at, maybe, but the left is worse at, maybe, because of the way that the left, I mean, the typical left camp meme is these blocks of text that kind of ruin the format of the meme. But there's also just kind of an observation that the right wing lost the culture war because it didn't foster creativity in it. And that, let's just say for Hollywood tended towards the liberal because there's something about the liberal ethos that fosters creativity or culture. And you know, that's something that I've seen, but at the same time, in wanting to preserve culture and create culture and finding myself finding conservative ideas resonating deeper and being more stable, I'm just trying to challenge, like, where's the creativity in the conservative? What are your thoughts on that? Because there have always been creative conservatives, witty conservatives, very smart conservatives, but for some reason the liberal or leftish has kind of captured the cultural machinery for producing content.
Yeah, that's true. I think on one level, it's just nonsensical. I mean, you can look through the 20th century and there have been extraordinary conservative and reactionary artists. I mean, you can look at literature. You have poets like Eliot. You have novelists like Evelyn Waugh. Even up to the present, we have novelists like Cormac McCarthy, Walker Percy, who in different ways would be considered, I think, men of the right. I do think one problem the right has had, though, is that a lot of our art has tended towards this kind of pessimism. You can see this in a figure like Michel Houellebecq, who writes these novels just about decline, about perversity, about the loss of meaning, which are incredibly creative and artistic, but also incredibly depressing. And I think these examples, these fascistic examples, have, for quite good reasons, made right-wing people quite cautious about expressing ideas in a very positive sense. Because the worry is that expressing ideology, or even just values positively, has a tendency towards fanaticism. And it does, on the one hand, but also there's a need to forge some kind of positive vision away from those very negative examples and not just kind of wallow in our own misery at the state of the world, which a lot of even very good right-wing art tends to do. So I don't think it's fair to say the left has monopolized creativity, but a certain kind of creativity which inspires new ways of being and ways of creation, the left has been more influential in.
Yeah, I was thinking there's every once in a while I'll see like architecture blogs or like kind of rightist art is celebrating the past or celebrating glories, celebrating European culture. And there's nothing wrong inherently with that, but there is a little, well, how proud are we allowed to be in this? Because it's really easy to say, it's really easy to be construed as a supremacist by saying that Beethoven is supreme to any other form of art or something like that, for example, or European architecture has hit a peak that no other place can get to, which isn't true. But if you believe that, then you can get in a category of being reactionary or looking backward. And I guess the tendency of the right, or at least the meme about the right, is that they are glorifying something that happened before and wanting to preserve and retreat back to a prior era. And along with that retreat can go a lot of the advances that we made, not technological, but sociological or societal advantages, decreasing discrimination, decreasing bigotry, increasing what is called rights, would be lost if we went back whole scale. So
yeah, I mean, one thing I'd say on the kind of superiority point is you can say that a form of creativity is superior for a particular place without saying it's necessarily superior to all other things. So, I mean, Krakow in Poland, for example, I think is perfect for Poland. It wouldn't necessarily be perfect for India, for China, for Japan. So I think I can say, the architecture in Central Krakow objectively as good as it can be, without saying it's necessarily superior to, I don't know, the Taj Mahal. So that's the kind of specificity, I think would be the right word, of the conservative mindset. Almost a kind of cultural relativism, but not just in the vague kind of excuse-making sense, but in the sense of something can be as good as it gets for one place and one people without putting down another place and another people, just because of the context that it's in. But yeah, you're right that we shouldn't just romanticize the past and not look to the future, because the past was once the future for somebody else. One time Shakespeare didn't exist, one time Krakow didn't exist, one time Beethoven didn't exist. So it would be very boring and stodgy to be like, well, that's as good as it gets. We just need to desperately try and cling on to this kind of cultural greatness. I guess that is a problem for conservatism. Sometimes it can become this kind of almost like clinging to life, gerontocratic form of ideas, where you're just desperately trying to keep something on life support. Because we do need to look to the future as well and realize that cultural greatness, in however one construes the word, isn't just the preserve of our ancestors, but hopefully we want it to be a field for our descendants as well.
You brought up a type of cultural relativism, and one thing in the conservative part of the right wing that I do admire is a sense of humility, like a limiting principle of humility, like nationalism or conservatism is about upholding the tradition that's inherited and recognizing and honoring that as the field from which we grow. That limiting principle can get too tight and non-playful if it goes overboard, but it also limits that fascistic, we want to take over the whole world and recreate the entire world in our image, that some conservatives criticize neocons and neoliberals as, trying to export this culture that doesn't really exist in the wrong way, and say, well, we can just be ourselves and happy with ourselves, and within that bounds we can start to play. But that playfulness is key, especially to attract and to attract the young people, and also to refresh the politic or the community.
Yeah, otherwise you're living in a museum.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is the sense you get in an English city. You're just kind of walking around surrounded by tourists looking up at these buildings and thinking, are we really alive, or are we somewhere between life and death?
Yeah.
So it's a genuine risk of conservative politics that it does become very constrictive on the imagination. But I would also look to examples like T.S. Eliot. His poetry was radically different from anything that came before it, but at least to the mind of those of us who admire him, it kind of respected what came before him while building on it and moving forwards. He wrote an essay called Tradition and the Individual Talent, where he said, basically that something new will honor everything that came before it and, subtly change the whole of the tradition. Respect, but also innovation. You need them both, because if you only have the innovation, you probably won't get anything worthwhile done, because you only have your own very limited capacities to draw upon. But if you only have the respect, you won't get anything done, because you just spend your life agape at the past.
So what are some of the cutting-edge, avant-garde cultural phenomena that attract you, that you're fascinated by?
Cutting-edge and avant-garde. I don't know if I'd make such grand claims for myself. I'm a fairly marginal and eccentric figure on the right, I'd say. So I guess I'm saying I wouldn't want to uphold myself as some kind of thought leader who is trying to draw everyone into my gravitational spell. But definitely I'm interested
Somehow I
in
don't believe you, but we'll let that slide.
But definitely I'm interested in different forms of emerging creativity on the right. There's a lot of interest towards kind of bypassing traditional publishing models and creating new cultural institutions. I just got sent an interesting new magazine. Sadly, my tablet is sitting on it, or I would show it to you, called I Am 7076, for example, which was created just off a right-wing web magazine, and it's a beautiful publication. I'm interested in the memes and just what they represent, not so much the memes as in, the little dog head, but just in how these online subcultures bubble and mutate and veer into all kinds of unexpected directions, which is being explored on some interesting kind of right-leaning magazines. Like there's a new magazine called Return, which I found very interesting and stimulating.
Both Return and I Am 1776 are kind of looking back.
That's true. They're looking back kind of organizationally, but they're looking forward creatively, we'll say.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. And that's one thing I guess that creators would have to bear in mind.
Yeah. And what is
I guess they're bubbling. Cultural undercurrents, let's say. It's not kind of a roaring tide that's going to take over and subsume the culture, but it's bubbling.
So aside from honoring the past, what are some of the political organizational principles or the ideas, the social ideas that are kind of gaining traction or arising in this kind of underground alt media space?
Oh, well, there's many different. I mean, the problem is they seem to spend more time arguing with each other rather than much else besides. I mean, I would definitely call myself a writer rather than an ideologue, so I can't speak, again, as a representative of any of these tendencies. I don't kind of carry the flag for any of them. But you have, for example, the post-liberal of different stripes, from the kind of Catholic traditionalists infused with a kind of economic leftism like Sohrab Almari, like Adrian Vermeulen, Matthew Schmitz. There's a new magazine called Compact, which is representing this kind of mishmash.
Communitarianism, maybe?
Kind of communitarianism. Yeah, that's a good word for it. Okay. You have the new right, which is blending social conservatism with a kind of industrial populism. I think that's what Yoram Hazony, I think you spoke with him recently. I think that's what his conference was dedicated to. And then kind of more on the online fringes, you have various more samizdat movements like the likes of Bronze Age Pervert and other notorious anonymous ideologues.
Yeah. I have never heard of samizdat before. What's the origin?
I could be butchering the pronunciation. It's possible that it's a word I've read but never said. But it refers to kind of underground literature in the days of Soviet communism. Like I say, my pronunciation may be terrible, but samizdat publications were kind of pamphlets that would be created underground and then passed around between people without being sold in shops.
Mm-hmm. I haven't yet been able to investigate the BAP, Bronze Age Pervert, his work. I'm hopefully not misgendering him, but it seems like he's probably pretty male. Have you been able to sink your teeth into that, Bauer?
I think it's an interesting subculture. It's almost like a movement of personalities as much as a movement of intellectuals. There's this heavy focus on this kind of vital living, like lifting weights, getting lots of sunshine, eating lots of nutrients. It's almost like right-wing ideas fused with the ideas of the hippie counterculture, and trying to drive young men into this kind of aesthetic, energetic direction. Again, I don't want to speak as someone with any particular knowledge of them, and definitely not as a representative of them.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting meeting point between kind of edgy ideology and then the kind of personal improvement subcultures that we see.
Yeah.
So I think it gives a lot of direction to young men. I guess the question of whether that's good or bad, I'll leave up to other people.
Or history. We'll see.
Or history.
Yeah, that virility, that's all I really know about the Bronze Age pervert, Bowers, that the aesthetics are about virility and also, like, you said edgy. Whatever edgy is, they like to be edgy and yet cultivate the virile man. There's also a lot of funny work, and there are these anon accounts, so they might be kind of doing some sort of psyop with this, some sort of weird new right work where they have these. Did you see that thread on why women shouldn't ride bikes or ride horses?
Oh, yeah. There's that's something very different. It's this kind of chest beating. It almost feels like a parody of traditional masculinity. And I'm not sure how self-aware that is.
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
Definitely less intelligent than the kind of BAP sphere. But this kind of, put up a photo of a girl in a sundress. You run into this woman while you're walking through an isolated field. How do you open? Which I think is, again, sometimes it strikes me maybe it's deliberate parody. If so, it's genius. But if not, it's trying to suck in kind of confused, alienated, sexually frustrated men with this kind of bombastic display of what a man should be, with all of these traditional masculine qualities turned up to 11 to the point where the sound is just meaningless noise.
Yeah, overcompressed. Yeah.
Absolutely, but it's very funny at the same time, just to laugh at the idea that when a woman rides a bike, they have this kind of orgasmic phenomenon. Yeah.
Have you been at all investigating the gender issue? And if so, like, what are some of the currents with regard to gender are coagulating or coalescing on the right?
Well, I have, maybe not as heavily as some others have, because it's focused for so many people, that I think so much good work is being done. I'm not sure how much I have to contribute to that. I do think on the right, there's definitely going to be a tension which is going to increase between more traditional conservatives and reactionaries and the kind of gender critical feminists. There has been this kind of awkward union between the two over this one issue where they found themselves on the same side. And there are some other issues where they could be said to be on the same side. Radical feminism, of course, is heavily against pornography, for example, and so traditional conservatives will tend to be. But there are many issues where they're very heavily not on the same side, whether it comes to abortion, whether it comes to the idea of, whether men and women have equal roles in society. So I don't see this coalition lasting for too long, and I've seen more arguments between the two camps, probably, sadly. Definitely on the kind of gender critical side, it's the transgender movement is construed more as anti-women, like claiming womanhood and appropriating it, let's say. And then on the right, there's more of a sense of it as this kind of, this grooming phenomenon, I guess, was the big word that was being used to describe it, and something that's more kind of more of a so see it more in terms of disorder rather than appropriation, I guess.
Yeah, or an attack on family and innocence, which are prized conservative values.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I guess there's a sense that anything which is different culturally or psychologically is being elevated to a kind of sacred value, which is not specific to the trans issue. We can see this as it relates to a whole host of psychological problems where the idea is that actually these aren't problems. These are, wonderful examples of personality.
Diversity, yeah.
Of the diverse ways of being. So I think that's another common right-wing form of attack on trans rights activism, as we'll call it that. So different lines of thinking, obviously none of them positive. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this kind of gender critical coalition.
And what about religion? Have you seen in the right, I mean, you bring up that there's some religious activity. I'm writing a blog post right now trying to push the metaphor of woke as a religion further than I've seen it done, because I'm tired of that metaphor. But there's a religiosity, I believe, in human nature. And religion kind of traditionally has been kind of owned by the right or the conservatives and kind of looked down upon by the liberals, generally speaking. And now religiosity is kind of reemerging in the woke or progressive left. So I'm just wondering, from your point of view or in your own personal arc, what role religion plays, or how you see it as useful or as not useful.
Well, just speaking for myself, I mean, I try when I approach religion not to think of it in terms of like its functionality.
Okay.
The question I'm really interested in is the truth claims. I mean, if Christianity is true, then its uses are almost beside the point. I mean, its function emerges from its truth if it's true. And if it's false, maybe it does have some functions, but that wouldn't be something I'd personally be interested in pushing, because I think our highest value should be truth. And if I didn't believe in it myself, I wouldn't recommend it to others, even if I wouldn't denigrate it. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't be something I'd be advocating for. I think that would be hypocritical, to say the least. So definitely there are all kinds of interesting ways of looking at the value of religion, from the kind of Petersonian view of it as expressing these deep psychological archetypes. On the left, there's a lot of kind of unspoken religiosity, like you say, but to some extent there's a real attempt to forge some kind of progressive Christianity or whatever. But just speaking for myself, I try to take a step back from that. There's a beautiful John Betjeman poem where he's talking about all of these kind of tropes of Christmas, the caroling and the mulled wine, and then he just says, but is it true? Because then, I wish I could quote it, but it's like, in this frosty air, nothing can compare to that more important question, which kind of transcends all of our ephemeral cultural bickering.
Being truth or being a sensation of fittedness?
Well, I don't understand the question.
You brought up that couplet, in the frosty air, what else could compare? Is that that's not a truth claim. That's not the answer to truth, that's not an answer.
No, I think he's saying that
proposition.
All of this kind of cultural baggage is secondary to the question of whether the truth claims of a religion are valid or not. Because only once you establish if it's valid or not can you really say, and also what should we do with it? I mean, if I have a computer, I can come up with all kinds of grand ideas about what I want to do with it. But if it doesn't work, then who cares?
Okay.
So the first thing to establish is, does this work? And then the second thing to establish is, and what does it do, and what can we do with it?
Mm-hmm.
Because, if there is a God, he's going to have a say about what we should do with his set of ideas as well.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. But is the question then is, how do we evaluate truth when it comes to, I guess, any religion? Is there a certain way of approaching the truth that's different than if we approach an operating system or a circuit board than when we go toward a social phenomenon like religion?
Well, because there are much more deep and complex philosophical and historical questions. But I mean, I'm an agnostic. I don't claim to know what is true or not. But I would take apologists at their word. I mean, there's a whole history of philosophical rationalizations of theism, which can be evaluated on their merits. There's a whole field of historical arguments for theism, which can be evaluated on their merits. And I agree there is also an interesting debate to be had about what it even means to be true, and like how something can ring true to us psychologically without necessarily having literal truth. The same way that I find ghost stories incredibly compelling without believing in ghosts. And that's a very valid discussion to have, but it's kind of separate from the question of literal truth, where I do think we should be able to apply similar philosophical, scientific, historical methods that we apply to other questions, but maybe in a different sense.
Is the is right wing thinking? Is it possible with agnosticism? Is it possible without? Can you be conservative and a-religious or disreligious, or not antagonistic?
I think being conservative and like anti-religious would be impossible because you're just spitting in the face of the past so much.
Okay.
I think being a-religious and conservative is possible but difficult. Because you can, as someone like Dr. Peterson does, you can respect religion without necessarily believing in its literal truth. You can just believe in its kind of cultural and psychological power and the wisdom that imparts, and you can kind of carry that wisdom forward. I think it's possible, but it's also difficult, because if you're saying, saying this is true and saying, well, this is kind of true if you look at it from this direction, then it's not such an inspiring way to frame something. Mm-hmm. So to have an a-religious right would be more difficult, at least in the Western sense. I mean, across the world, of course, if you go to somewhere like Singapore, they have a very different kind of technocratic a-religious right. Mm-hmm. But yeah, in the Western sense, it's possible but difficult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the gender lens, or looking at gender, is I think is a powerful way of going into any kind of cultural discussion, to see how men and women are theorized, and then the norms that are put on their relationship really shows in a concrete manner the outcome of like the general, not just theory, but the kind of the culture is really manifest in the conception and the relationship between men and women. And also another one, but it's a little bit more difficult, especially in a post-religious kind of society, is religion. Like, what is the belief system and the aesthetic that is transmitted through the belief system? And like many people have criticized the woke, are using a religious framework in order to do that, and seeing these rites and rituals and metaphors and stuff. But it always makes me wonder, well, is it really a doctrine? And what is it? Where does that doctrine come from? And will it eventually kind of mutate into some sort of stable book or stable religion? Whereas on the right, they have a lot to draw from. On the progressive woke left, they're kind of adrift at this point. They're not. It doesn't seem like they're totally aware that they're trying to recreate Christianity, but there's a lot of very Christian things that are going on in there, with the baptisms and the different sacraments that they're recreating almost whole cloth, but it's just so similar. So,
I mean, I think that's why there is such a force of dogmatism, because when you really know that beyond a certain wall you can't defend what you want to defend, you're going to defend that outer wall to the utmost, because you really don't have much faith in what's going to come next.
Okay, yeah.
So that's definitely a problem with modern progressivism, where it has kind of drawn so much from religion and then abandoned ship. So yeah, I think that explains a lot of the rhetorical and institutional ferocity that one can encounter when engaging with it.
What's your sense of the end of the West? Do you subscribe to cultural decline? Are we in a period of cultural decline, or is it just too messy? Do you have a sense of that, or like an intuition? I know it doesn't have to be true, but what do you feel?
I think we're approaching a time of kind of moral crunch points concerning how to respond to, massive demographic change across the world, where some populations rapidly expanding and some of them are rapidly declining. How can that be managed, and what conclusions can we draw from that? Also connected with technology. If our technological capacities rapidly advance concerning kind of artificial intelligences or gene editing or, artificial wombs, the kind of stuff that makes me shudder internally, but know that generally throughout history, people shuddering internally didn't achieve much. I would know if I'd phrase this as decline, but yeah, kind of cultural decision times maybe, where the path the West takes at this point is going to radically
inform its outcome.
Yeah. Inform its outcome, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have skin in the game, though? I mean, even if you don't consider yourself somebody who has answers, like, do you have the desire to kind of make sense of that and come to a truth of what should be done?
Yes, but also with a realistic sense of my own capacities. Some people just have bigger brains than I do.
But wittier sentences? I mean, you're kind of top notch with the witty sentence. You and Mary Harrington are whip crackers.
Thank you. But generally the witty sentence and the grand idea don't necessarily come in concert. Generally, the witty sentences are there to support people who have the grand ideas and to kind of assess their ideas and to frame their ideas and to promote their ideas and to defend or criticize their ideas. I guess I think there's a place for people who are kind of asking questions that might not have been thought of, kind of pushing at weak points, people who are bringing up data which might have been forgotten, kind of marginal commentators, like I said. But, for myself, of course, I want to have a sense of what's going to come in the future. I mean, I'm going to have family members who are going to live on after I am. I'm going to have, a home which hopefully will stand after I'm in the ground. Hopefully I'm going to have writing that at least one or two people will look back on and think, wow, that was interesting, rather than, God, that was misguided and terribly problematic. So I hope I can have a sense of what's coming, but I'm not necessarily the best person to put that in a 600-page book and call it a manifesto for the future.
But what are some of the crunch points that you're most concerned with, most invested in?
Goodness, that's a very good question. Deep question. I almost
beside Dave Rubin's writing.
I think, like I said, technology especially, I think that's one, even if it's not the most major, I think one that tends to get overlooked is the capacities we're going to have in the future just to reshape ourselves, and what that's going to mean for humanity or for different classes, because of course this capacity to reshape ourselves through gene editing, etc., isn't necessarily going to be equally distributed. So that's a crunch point I'm very interested in. The simultaneous kind of aging of societies in the West and Asia, and then kind of explosion of societies in the subcontinent. Not that I want to emphasize in the manner of conflict, but like how are our descendants going to simultaneously like energize our societies and keep them afloat while improving the institutions and the capacities of countries with rapidly expanding populations. So yeah, these are some that I'm interested in.
Gene editing, huh?
Absolutely, it's coming, whether we like it or not.
Is there something that you would have edited if you go back to your not conception, a little after your conception, when the gene got put all together?
I would have pressed delete. No,
really?
No,
something you add?
Well, no, I mean, so for example, I can kind of see both sides. Like, if, for example, when I was younger, I had a phase of mental illness. Now, if that is to some extent reducible to genetics, I could understand the argument that says, this is going to cause tremendous suffering for future people. It's going to cause lots of problems to people around them. Is there some way to remove this source code? But on the other hand, I mean, without that period of mental illness, I wouldn't be who I am today. So that's not necessarily a positive thing to play God in that sense. Yeah. I don't know if that's the best example.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of moral quandary, I guess, that we could well find ourselves in.
Yeah, the question of suffering, its use, or I didn't read it. I just saw it on Reddit. Some philosophical argument about suffering isn't necessary, but overcoming adversity is very necessary for the growth of character. And what, this very 2016 talking point about the safe spaces and what that gives rise to. The Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff coddling of the American mind kind of point of view of growing up in playgrounds covered in foam, and we can do the same thing with our genomes. We can just smooth out all the kinks and make it just a smooth sailing. Will that produce the good person? And if it does produce the good person, will the trade-off be no longer producing great people and no longer producing failures? Can we just have the good without the great and without the worse? If we got rid of the Jack the Ripper, would we get rid of the Mozart? To reference.
And will we even have the intelligence to know the difference?
Yeah.
When it comes to it. Absolutely. And the same kind of questions with artificial intelligence. It's not the kind of science fiction style kind of will a giant computer kill us all, but in the sense of like, if we are going to have these super intelligent machines, how are we going to optimize them for our interests rather than creating some kind of gap between what is good for us and what the machine considers to be good for its functioning. It worries me, the idea that the very limited human intelligence that we apply to so many of our current problems is going to be dedicated to this extremely complex and increasingly consequential kind of questions in the future. I mean, I feel like we just about got through the 21st century without dropping nuclear bombs on each other, and at least the fundamental question there was, do I push this button? So how shall I write this code very precisely, for example, seems like a much more delicate question.
Yeah.
Concerning the moral and the intellectual at the same time.
Yeah, and then upkeep and outcome. So you do these little articles. I was scrolling through them all. They tend to be on average like 5 to 7 minutes. Do you have? And you've been doing this. You said 13 years, just starting on the Guardian with your angry leftoid ravings. Do you have? Is there something a larger project taking place in your mind? Are you becoming aware of like a book or like a theme that is going to kind of solidify into something grander or larger, not grand in and of itself, but grander?
I should emphasize the Guardian was just in the comments section. I wish I could say I was writing for the Guardian when I was 18, but no, that was just below the line saying, Polly Toynbee, you're terribly wrong about this. Last year I wrote a small fiction book, a collection of short stories about the cultural repercussions of the noughties, which was the decade I came of age in. So that was one kind of more long-term project. I'm in discussions tentatively about writing a book on the religious questions I talked about, but those are, there's nothing confirmed, so I don't want to get too deep into that, because I think generally if we talk about our plans, God starts to laugh.
Or something does.
Or something does. But I mean, to some extent, I am just a jobbing hack. Like, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing to be. I mean, I've got some H.L. Mencken collections over there. Obviously, Christopher Hitchens, in general, people remember his columns more than his books. Just building up your little columns and seeing what they cohere into, in a sense. Yeah. That's a long-term kind of fragmentary project in itself. So that doesn't mean a lot of them aren't complete trash and should die on some neglected corner of the internet, but hopefully some of them are cohering in some substantive direction.
What's your book on the naughties called?
It's called Naughties, which is very imaginative.
It's clever. And
Naughties, 11 tales of a dismal decade.
Oh, wow. So you look in that decade and you see dark times.
Yeah, especially
Tony
in British
Blair.
sense. I mean, it's absolutely. Tony Blair, reality television, Iraq War, kind of British indie music. It was all a bit depressing.
Well, yeah, you guys, Oasis was already in decline by the naughties,
Oasis was kind of a tribute act for the Beatles, and then we were already on the tribute acts to the Beatles, so it was an uninspiring time to be alive.
Yeah. I didn't know that you're so interested in religion that you would dedicate your half a year to writing about it.
So I guess I didn't really want to write an explicitly political book. I mean, if I write an article about politics that's more than 2,000 words long, I start to hate myself. So,
oh, really?
I have no idea what other people think. So I wanted to write something that was more kind of not so argumentative, maybe not so
opinion.
Partisan isn't the word I'm looking for, but not so mired in the culture wars and online debates. And I mean, it is a very long-term interest of mine, and I think lots of cultural things which have formed around it made it a good thing to explore. Like I was saying, with the kind of cultural Christianity on the left and the right. So hopefully, it's going to be a worthwhile project. But then possibly this is the only thing anyone will ever hear about. So,
well, there's got to be some sort of drawl then, in your imagination, the very least, from religion or toward religion. Abstracting, if you don't mind going there, like what's attractive about it?
I don't want to die without having some sense of what events put us here in the first place. The metaphor I use is, if you woke up like tomorrow in the middle of the street and you had no idea where you'd been or what had happened, you would spend the whole of your life being like, what the hell happened to me that night? You know, who hit me on the head? Who put drugs in my drink? Where was I? What did I do? And in a sense, at birth, that happened to us all. We suddenly appeared into this world without a very clear sense of how we came to be. Mm-hmm. So I want to have some sense, at least, when I die, of, I don't want to say the meaning, because it's not really a kind of, what's the purpose of it all sense of feeling. It's a more kind of, or it's a more one note, like, how am I actually here? Who or what created this? Mm-hmm. And of course, it's a question that our ancestors have been debating for millennia. So I think the tendency now to kind of see it as a bit of an antiquated thing to talk about is
makes
at
it
least
attractive.
Disrespectful.
Yeah.
Right, and it makes it attractive.
Yeah. Are there certain religious thinkers or writers that you're drawn to? You mentioned Hitchens. Not a religious.
Yeah, I mean, when I grew up, I was reading a lot of Christopher Hitchens, as many angry young men were. And I guess one idea that motivated this, in air quotes, project is, I think, like, the new atheists had very bad arguments, but I think it was a good argument to have. And now I think people, if they say that new atheists were kind of cringe, Reddit and Fedora, they're not really saying on an intellectual level, they're more saying that they were just kind of weird to care about it in the first place. And I don't think it was weird to care about it. I just think they had bad arguments to defend their opinions. Mm-hmm. And then there are all kinds of apologists' writings that I find interesting, even if I can't vouch for their truth claims, obviously. Mm-hmm. Or I wouldn't be an agnostic. Such as, who comes to mind? The kind of themistic philosophers like Edward Fazer, mm-hmm. The more kind of historically minded writers like my friend Bethel McGrew on Twitter, who I think you know as well.
Bethel?
Yeah. Esther O'Reilly, the pseudonym. And then, of course, the kind of grand classical philosophers like Aquinas or Augustine, Leibniz. So, yeah, many different thinkers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And poetry? Is that...
my favorite.
What role has poetry had in your life?
Poetry is very good for kind of explaining a feeling to yourself. So some of the poems of Philip Larkin, for example, is an English poet who has long done that for me. I think that's one thing which kind of fostered an interest in religion for me, because he was also someone who didn't believe in God but was very fascinated by religion and by English culture, by T.S. Eliot, some of the work of W.H. Auden. Yeah, poetry kind of, it frames feelings. You can read a poem and think, oh, that's why I was thinking about it in this particular way, or that's why I was feeling this particular thing. Because the precision of the language is generally much more elegant than the vagueness of our thoughts, as you can probably tell from the vagueness of some of my ramblings here.
You're free to be vague. You're free to be vague.
That's good, because I don't have much choice.
Do you dip into the poet making, poesis? You concern yourself
I used
more
to try
with
and
the
write
prose?
poems.
Okay.
I wasn't very good. My sister is an excellent poet, so I kind of left that to her. There's the novelist Kingsley Amis had two sons, And one of them was Martin Amis, who also went on to be a novelist, and the other one was an artist. And when they were children, he said to them, "What do you want to be when you're older?" And Martin said, "I want to be a novelist," and his brother said, "I want to be a painter." And apparently Kingsley Amis said, "Excellent. So the Amises will maintain our stranglehold on fiction while branching out into new conquests." So I guess I left my sister with the stranglehold on poetry.
Is there anything coming up for you that if people want to be excited for more of your work? I guess you have your columns. Are they weekly, or you're very frequent with the postings? I don't know if you have a schedule or not with your various publications.
So at the moment, I'm writing weekly for The Critic in the UK for their website. And then I write pretty much whenever anyone will have me. I'll just turn up at an editor's email inbox, knocking on the door, holding my ideas, screaming to let me in. I'm going to do a small online course about writing for an English institution called, I think it's pronounced Paideia Forum. Paideia, I think, Forum, which is a platform which is creating kind of online learning, bypassing the traditional institutions. So you can do short courses in kind of small groups with tutors who are going to be lecturing on various subjects. I think the new season has Philippe Lemoyne, for example, one of my favorite commentators. He's going to do a course on epidemiology. And then some very interesting English academics. And I'm going to be doing a course about writing. Not so much kind of how to be the next Tolstoy, but more about like how to get yourself to write, how to be productive, how to find inspiration, how to edit and criticize yourself. So that's one thing. Hopefully I'll be writing a book. We'll see. I have my fingers crossed, my toes crossed, my intestines crossed.
Oh, don't cross everything. Yeah. Gotta let the flow happen.
And then just, there's my
Will this be your
Substack.
first college level course?
I'm not sure I was even educated in something on such a grand level. So hopefully it'll go well.
Yeah.
But like I said, I don't want to present it too pretentiously. I mean, it's not going to be me kind of saying, this is the style everyone must adopt. It's more going to be about the business of writing, just in the sense of how do we get the words down on paper? Because I think many, many people, they really want to write. They probably have some good ideas, but it's about how to get it out of yourself. So that should be interesting. And then I have a Substack where I bother my subscribers with as many email updates as I can.
And it's just Ben Sixsmith, or did you have a clever Substack name?
No, it's just bensixsmith.substack.com.
Very straightforward, yeah.
I felt like there were so many Substack writers just kind of jostling for space that I needed the most recognizable way to knock on people's doors. The title is meant to be The Zone. For some reason, that name just jumped into my head.
Okay. Yeah.
The URL is bensixsmith.substack.
Like the danger
zone? Too many.
Or? Yeah.
Like the danger zone, absolutely.
Okay.
But there's just too many Substacks nowadays. It's become a kind of feeding frenzy.
Yeah.
I think we need to fight it out, Substack versus Substack, and see who can reign supreme.
Yeah, maybe if you articulated a contest of sorts to narrow down the field, you might be able to get some ad revenue.
Specifically boxing. I'm looking at Jake Paul and the work he's doing. So I think we need to have a kind of opinion commentator boxing. I'm not sure how well I'd do it, but it'd be fun to watch.
Well, they did absorb letter, so you could probably do a more contentious version of that technology, where there's some sort of voting thing or something like that.
That's true. And I think Glenn Greenwald would win as well. I think he's a fighter.
He's got, if nothing else, he's got grit.
Yeah, absolutely. He'd never give up.
No. Well, I've been seeing you since I arrived on the scene, and enjoying your wit and your commentary. So it was great to be able to meet up with a fellow Ben
Thank you.
in this
Thank you for
space.
having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah.
I've seen so many people chatting with you. It's good to be among them.
Oh yeah, there you go. You're part of my pantheon. Maybe I can get you and Glenn Greenwald to really have it out someday.
I don't know. I think I'd have to hide under the table. I would.
No, really?
No, I'm joking. I'm joking. He has an argumentative style that I can just imagine being translated into a kind of brutal martial arts aesthetic. There are some writers, you read their stuff and you think, when you turn this keyboard off, I bet you're going to make a lovely fruit sponge and play with your dog. And there are some writers where you read them and you think, I bet you're just going to go down to the basement and just beat a big slab of meat with your bare hands. And Greenwald is one of those meat punches.
Huh.
Yeah. That's
I always kind of imagine you retiring to a portico or a porch with a cigarillo and a nice bottle of Chianti after writing one of your screeds.
That's much more romantic than actually is, which is a cigarette and a tiskia. But hey, I'm gonna let people live with your fantasy. It's much more cool.
Well, if there's nothing else I can do for you, is to make you slightly more cool. No, you're already cool on your own, but every little bit helps.
Thank you.
Cool. I'm gonna wrap up the recording part of the interview. So thank you very much, Ben. Oh, where does your name come from? What's the etymology of Sixsmith?
So I believe it comes from the sickle, which was like a curved blade that was used for cutting grass. And then smith is just someone who makes.
Okay.
So I think my ancestors made sickles, which is, it sounds less dignified than wielding sickles, but, at least they're involved in something kind of solid manufacturing.
Genghis wouldn't have gotten as far as he did without people of your type supporting his armory. Yeah, so there you go.
Absolutely. What about Boyce?
Boyce is it is English, but the theory is that it comes from Le Bois, which means from the wood, or Norman kind of import. We're like kind of some sort of tree folk that ended up in Britain somehow and then just kind of got anglicized. So.
No.
Yeah.
I know some Polish surnames, for some reason, they're big on animal surnames, which is sometimes very cool. So I knew someone, I think their first name was Christoph and their surname was Wilk, which is wolf. Mm. And I thought, wow, Christopher Wolf, that's a good name. But I did meet someone whose surname was Żabka, which is frog. And I was not entirely disappointed that I don't walk around with a name like Benjamin Frog.
That's kind of good.
It's a noble animal in its way.
Yeah. Sounds like a character from Neil Stephenson or Neil Gaiman fairy tale. Ben Frog. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.